Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a really exciting topic, the Shroud of Turin. And the big question is, do we know whether or not the Shroud of Turin is authentic? Is it holy or is it a hoax? Is it fact or is it fiction? So that's what we're going to get into. And I'm really excited about this topic because I always thought the Shroud of Turin was a hoax based on the findings from 1988. And so the carbon dating findings from 1988. And so I decided to do a little bit of digging in the academic research to find out what people are saying today in 2022 about the Shroud of Turin. And to my surprise, I found quite a bit of evidence in support of its authenticity. Now, I have to say, I looked at it as carefully as I could, and I looked at it as objectively as I could, because I don't have any skin in the game as far as if it's authentic or not. But the information that I found, I'm going to share with you today, and then you can decide what you think is the truth. You can decide if we have enough evidence in support of its authenticity, or if you think that we do not, that we should still believe it is a hoax. And so I'm gonna notice my screen just went out. Okay, I want to say hi before I start here too. I want to say hi to Patrick Alexander, Gorgeous Roddy Chrome, Zhang Fukushang, Slam RN, and Save Otangelo. So hopefully Otangelo's doing okay and that he needs to be saved. And so you can see right here on the screen a little interaction I had on Twitter not too long ago. And this is when I still was believing that the jury is out on the Shroud of Turin. And so we can see right here, Spartan Theology says the shroud is Jesus, got a question mark. And it follows up by me saying the jury is out. And then Dr. Jim Major said, it is really not, it never has been. And so with that kind of a comment, I thought, well, let's go see, is it out? Is what's going on here? So the Shroud of Turin, so here is the deal. Here's a quote. So many academics believe the shroud is the most controversial artifact and the most studied relic in history. That comes from Kane and Boyd 2018, and an impossible consensus, according to Casablanca in 2021. Here's one other quote coming from Bryant 2000. One thing is certain, the controversy regarding the Shroud of Turin is far from resolved. So on September 22nd, 1988, the New York Times dealt a death blow to Christians with the headline, Tests Show Shroud of Turin to be Fraud. Scientist hints. The following February, Nature published research by Damon and colleagues, which declared that they had, quote, conclusive evidence based on carbon dating that the Shroud of Turin was medieval and, quote, not from the time of Christ. The authors dated the shroud to between 1260 and 1390 with, quote, at least 95% confidence. So remember those years because we're going to get back to that, 1260 to 1390. As an academic, I've been instructed to be very careful in making statements about my research findings. So I never say that I had conclusive evidence of anything based on population sampling techniques, which is precisely what the Shroud of Turin was based on. The Shroud of Turin was based on a tiny sample from the bottom corner of a large 14 by 3 feet linen cloth. The tiny sample, which 3 global labs in Tucson, Oxford, and Zurich cut up in varying ways, exhibited, quote, egregious heterogeneity, according to Rainey and colleagues. So let me switch this up here. You can see right here in this visual from Rieni and colleagues, 2013, you can see how this Shroud of Turin was cut up, this little piece, this little tiny corner piece from the left bottom corner. So the samples between the 3 labs were very different in size. They showed that the distance from the edge of the cloth made a difference in the radiocarbon dating estimate. Here is another study, and this one is more recent. This one is from Walsh and Schwalb in 2020. And you can see right here what's going on. And you can see again, we've got, it depends. In other words, the further away you are from the edge, the carbon levels would vary. And that's problematic. That is a problem. And so that suggested, again, what Riani called egregious heterogeneity. For this reason and many others, recent scholars have called the dubious methodology of the 1989 carbon dating study into question. But beyond their flawed methodology, recent academic studies have found a much more important source of the problem. The dating of the tiny corner portion of the shroud sampled for carbon dating appears medieval, but the medieval portion was sewed into the original by master craftsmen after the original had been damaged, likely in medieval times. This video is going to expand on that. I'm going to provide my sources. But while I do that, I also want to come back over here and say hi to people. So I've got Diagorus of Melos, I've got Stripper Liquor, I've got Slam RN, Nathaniel Robinson, Save Tangelo again, Stripper Liquor. Yep, good to see you guys. So here we go. Let's get to the next slide. So here, let's talk a little bit about the shroud itself. So the 14th century dating of the 1989 study coincided with the presentation of the shroud around 1356 by the family of a French knight named Geoffrey de Charny to a church in Liry, France. It wasn't until actually 1578 that the shroud made his way over to Turin, and that's why it's called today the Shroud of Turin. Before that, it was just the shroud. De Charny was quiet about where he sourced the shroud, but his son claimed it was a gift, while his granddaughter claimed it was a spoil of war. Around 30 years later, the Bishop of Troyes, France, reported to the Pope that an artist had forged the shroud, so the Pope declared it to be a fake icon rather than an authentic religious relic. So note the distinction between the icon and the relic. Whether the bishop or Pope examined the issue properly back then is unknown. And we do not have information regarding whether anyone had biased reasons for making the assertions they made. What we do know is that to this day, the Catholic Church has not given the Shroud of Turin any Catholic support as an authentic relic of Jesus Christ. They simply won't say. So you can see right here the image. As you can see now, this is taken on a negative image, this particular image of Jesus. And let's talk a little bit more about the image. Many believe the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial linens that Joseph of Arimathea wrapped around Jesus when he buried him in his tomb. The shroud shows the image of a naked man who had been badly beaten, crucified, and pierced in his side. Only 4 fingers appear on each of his hands, which is consistent with a man who had been crucified. Crucifixion causes the thumbs to fold in under the hands. He had over 100 markings between shoulder and calf, which are consistent with having been whipped repeatedly. The many lacerations on his head further indicated penetration by sharp objects that were also consistent with a crown of thorns. Scholars have estimated the man's size to be 5 feet 11 inches and his weight to be around 100 pounds. Okay. Now here is what is about the linen. The linen of the Shroud of Turin is made of flax fibers and is woven in a herringbone pattern, which is consistent with first century patterns, according to scholarship. The body of the linen is also devoid of paint or other similar external applications. And that comes from Ray Rogers, who was a direct investigator, one of the 33 people who were allowed to go into the shroud back in the 1970s. The linens are mentioned in the Gospels prior to and after James's resurrection from the dead. Here's what Mark says in Mark 15:45-46, relevant verse about the linens. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. Now we're talking, of course, about Jesus' corpse that was up on the cross, and we're talking about Pontius Pilate granting it to Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Now, here we get the continuation. When Peter and John arrived, and this is coming from the Gospel of John, it's in Gospel of John 20:6-7. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. Okay, so we've got that verse. He went into the tomb and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Now, just remember that there was a face cloth and the Shroud of Turin and the linen cloths. Okay, so we've got both there. So the question is the Shroud of Turin authentic? I haven't given you enough information to cite if it is or not. So after the 1989 study was published, many Christians, including myself, ignored the Shroud of Turin, believing the conclusive evidence offered in 1989 and heralded by the media. Other Christians were very uncomfortable with the 1989 study, so they began looking into solutions, such as saying the fire of 1532 that damaged the shroud modified its carbon content, or that human hands or oils had contaminated it. And then, of course, that changed the carbon dating. These hypotheses haven't always been well received. In fact, Ray, that I've talked a little bit about before, the person who was at the thing, he used to be rather annoyed with some of these hypotheses. He didn't think that they were true. And so here's what we have. Ray Rogers is the person I'm referring to. And that's when God stepped in and used his humble servants to shed some light on the truth. The solution was simpler than the proposals of fire effects or contamination. Two non-scientists came up with it initially. Sue Benford and Joe Marino found images on the shroud that indicated the weave of the radiocarbon dated sample was different from the weave in the central parts and image of the shroud. They hypothesized that master weavers may have added patches on the edges of the shroud following the 16th century fire. They also provided evidence of the existence of master weavers during the period. In fact, in their paper, it's fascinating. They also talk about a study that's shown from a textile group that the particular type of weave that was done in Jesus's time was discontinued in around the 4th century. They said that this particular type, which was quite common in the Hellenistic era and the Roman times, became very uncommon and was pretty much discontinued. Now, Ray Rogers is a chemist who is one of the original members of the group of 33, like I mentioned, shroud investigators who had access to the shroud and who had been permitted to retain small portions of its linen. He heard about Benford and Marino's research and realized that he was in a unique position to debunk it. So he analyzed a sample of the linen that had been saved, which had been located in the middle of the lab's radiocarbon sample. He found that it contained cotton and had been dyed to match the color of the main interior shroud linen, which was not made of cotton and contained no paint or dyes. Here's what he said. Now, he passed away in around 2005 of cancer. This occurred just before he passed away. He decided that he was going to have to get out there and investigate these two people. And here's what he said, quote, "The dye found on the radiocarbon sample," this is the little teeny piece of cloth that the investigators used to determine whether there was carbon dating. "The dye found was not used in Europe before AD 1271 and was not common until more than 100 years later. The combined evidence from chemical kinetics, analytical chemistry, cotton content, and pyrolysis proves that the material from the radiocarbon area of the shroud is significantly different from that of the main cloth. The radiocarbon sample was thus not part of the original cloth and is invalid for determining the age of the shroud. Because the storage conditions through the centuries are unknown, a more accurate age determination will require new radiocarbon analyses with several fully characterized and carefully prepared samples." Other studies have lamented the quality of research in the 1989 study and the fact that the authors did not follow protocol by gathering samples from more than one location on the shroud. That's a big problem. So I also want to say hi to Joe Marino. Hey, are you the Marino? I just referred to a Marino. I don't think you had the same first name. So hi, everybody. Here we go. Let's talk about the other evidence that gives us ancient dating. Now, what Ray Rogers estimated was the dating was somewhere between 1,300 and 3,000 years ago. And here are some of the reasons why he came up with this dating. The number one reason, maybe number one, I don't know if he ranks them, but vanillin, the presence of vanillin. So Ray Rogers analyzed the levels of vanillin in the shroud. Vanillin is produced from lignin, which is a component of plant cell wall. Vanillin breaks down over time, and the breakdown levels vary as a function of the temperature in which the vanillin was stored. By analyzing levels of vanillin, one can assess an approximate age of a material. Rogers, again, he's a chemist, analyzed lignin in various shroud samples, such as the race sample from 1973. Rogers also noted that the race and C14 corner was covered with a unique gum dye coating, which isn't on the main portion of the shroud. Here's what he says, quote, if the shroud had been produced between AD 1260 and 1390, as indicated by the radiocarbon analysis, lignin should be easy to detect. A linen produced in AD 1260 would have retained about 37% of its vanillin in 1978. The race threads, the Holland cloth, and all other medieval linens gave the test for vanillin wherever lignin could be observed on a growth nodes. The disappearance of all traces of vanillin from the lignin in the shroud indicates a much older age than the radiocarbon laboratories reported. But that's not all. Now we have pollen. Okay, so here's pollen. A botanist from Hebrew University called Avinoam Danan analyzed pollen that was taken from the shroud, finding the presence of a unique combination of flower species that were present in Jerusalem in April and May. Well, that's when Jesus was crucified. We estimate that Jesus was crucified around April 3rd of the year 33. Another study by Alan and Mary Wanger entitled Flora of the Shroud of Turin further supported the presence of pollen local to Israel on the shroud. Oh, but there's more. I haven't even gotten to the really good stuff. Just wait till I get to the really good stuff. Okay, so here is the next one. You can see right here in this image, in this slide. Now take a look at the picture on the left. That is the photo of, the picture on the right is a photo of the Shroud of Turin. The picture on the left is how the Shroud of Turin appears to the naked eye. Now, the interesting thing is you can see how much more clarity came out in this photo, which was taken in 1898. I'll get to that in just a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to get to that face cloth that we talked about. So the Sudarium of Oviedo, okay, so that's the little face cloth. The Sudarium is a face cloth or sweat cloth that many believe was on Jesus's face during and after his crucifixion. Like the Shroud of Turin, the cloth contains much blood, which is colored red. The red color of the blood may surprise those who expect blood to darken with time, but the presence of significant bilirubin due to the beatings Jesus received resulted in the retention of a red color. And again, many of the things I'm saying are backed by the studies I've cited at the bottom of each slide. So this is not something that I am making up. Here's something else that's really interesting. The blood type in both is also AB. Now that's the unistic. Now here's something else to think about. Got another image for you. Let's go back to the previous slide and take a look at this image. So look at the shroud image. Prior to 1898, the image on the shroud appeared fuzzy and no one could see the image of a man. But in 1898, the first person took a photograph of the shroud, an amateur photographer named Secundo Pia. When he developed the image, he was shocked to find that the reverse in the image was much more detailed. Okay, if you just look at that, you can see this idea that people in the 1500s would have access or would have any idea that this sort of thing could appear. So, all right, so let's go back to, there's our image. Okay, we got something else to talk about a little bit here. So I'm going to show you some images of artwork that is older than the estimate of 1300, the 1300-year estimate, 1360. I'm going to show you some older information. So here's the first one. You're going to see that some of the earliest images of Jesus are consistent with the image in the shroud. The first image above is from the 4th century in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The second image, okay, now this one is the one to look even more closely at. Take a look at this image. Note the nose. Note that the lips are a little bit smaller. Note the eyes, kind of deep set eyes in a way. And just take a note of that. And so you're going to see right there, that is called the Pantocrator. And it's a Greek word, which means almighty. The Christ, the Pantocrator, is from St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, Egypt. And that was around the 6th or 7th century. And then you can see in this next slide, you can see right here, A really interesting, if you can kind of look at that closely, that's the Hungarian Prey Codex. And again, this also precedes when these supposedly 95% confident carbon estimates were taken. The Hungarian Prey Codex, notice in the codex, notice the image of Christ. You can see right here how he's laid. You can see how you only see 4 of his fingers. Again, that's because crucified fingers, the thumbs are tucked back. So you can see that. And that's been commonly dated to between 1192 and 1195, according to Casablanca in 2021. Now here we're going to get to the really good stuff. I saved the best for right around the last. This is going to blow your mind. You'll be so excited about this. So here we go. This is the recreation of an image of Jesus from the tomb from a person called Giulio Fanti. Okay, so here is the 3-dimensional image. Unlike all other photos we have today, the image in the Shroud of Turin is 3-dimensional, which is confirmed by modern scientific methods of holography. Quote, "It is astounding to see a 3-dimensional man emerge from the 2-dimensional image on the shroud, but that is not what is most astonishing. Rather, it is the fact that the man is seen in relation to the shroud as floating between the top and bottom sections. He is not resting on the stone slab of the tomb, and thus there is no distortion of the body's image. The buttocks and back are free of distortion by gravity pulling the man's flesh onto a somewhat flattened condition. The body appears to have been levitating at the moment the image was formed on the shroud." That is the Mac Daddy right there. That is from a person called White, 2019. Here is another comment, and this one's coming in from Trib of 2006. And so here's another comment that gets to our next point on radiation and light. Shroud researcher Ray Rogers, and I'm quoting here, and this is from Trib, a physical chemist at Los Alamos Laboratory said, quote, and this is famous, this is a very famous quote from him, "I am forced to conclude that the image was formed by a burst of radiant energy, light if you like. In other words, the image is recorded on the cloth as if by a photo flash of brilliant light radiating from the body of the man in the shroud. Scientists haven't figured out how the image transferred from the man to the cloth. They have failed in any attempt to recreate it, but they do believe that a burst of high intensity energy and radiation occurred, which they estimated would be similar to the burst from the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, which printed images of victims on building walls." So you can see the sort of energy coming out of the Son of God. Pretty amazing. So that brings us to my conclusion. I hope you guys have been enjoying this. So my conclusion is the devil won a victory in 1988 with the Herald from the New York Times that cast doubts on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. For decades, many Christians, self-included, have paid no attention to the shroud. But the research in the past 20 years has kicked the findings of the carbon dating study to the curb. Not only have researchers identified major flaws in the 1989 study, but researchers have identified flaws in the original sampling. The teeny piece of the Shroud of Turin that was sampled for radiocarbon dating was a medieval addition, as confirmed by an academic study by the chemist and shroud investigator Ray Rogers. Christians do not need the Shroud of Turin to confirm our Christianity, but it's certainly a bonus. It's the best evidence we have of Jesus' resurrection. Furthermore, we have physical evidence in the absence of paint and vanillin and the presence of blood, anointing oils, bilirubin, pollen, the Sudarium of Oviedo, reverse photo imaging, and holographic 3D imaging, which a medieval fraudster could not have possibly conjured up. The Shroud of Turin is the best physical evidence we have of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. With the shroud, we can see the person of Jesus Christ, who laid his life down for ours and suffered a brutal beating and crucifixion. As he said in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay his life down for his friends. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I want to say hi to people in the chat who is still here. I've got Diagorus here, Janice Winchester, and Zhang Fukusheng, and Christian Resistance. And it's really good stuff here. So we've got a lot of great evidence. I want to see if I missed anybody else. Gorgeous Roddy Chrome, Nathaniel Robinson. So this is a pretty good thing. I want to say thank you, everybody, to coming today. Please like, subscribe, share this with your friends, and do come again. And I might make more Shroud videos. It looks like I have quite a few people watching compared to my normal watch. So it must be a topic that people are really interested in. And so let's do more. We'll do more. I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday night, Saturday morning, wherever this finds you. And I just want to say God bless you. Just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.